Noon train to Harmony Gulch. The sun blazed upon Harmony Gulch, an unrelenting forge hammering the land. Dust devils pirouette across the cracked earth encircling the depot, tiny crimson whirlwinds that rasped against skin and left a gritty residue on everything. Heat waves distorted the already dilapidated buildings into mirages. Lost in a dime novel, Billy Harding sat upon a weathered bench, oblivious to the brutal climate. The lone rider and the bandit queen transported him. He devoured the narrative, casting himself as the valiant hero righting wrongs with a revolver. He yearned for a mother's touch, a gentle soul to patch his worn clothes and spin tales far removed from shootouts and robberies. Perhaps Clementine would be such a figure. A sudden gust yanked at his book, forcing Billy to snatch it back, ink smudging his fingertips. Looking up, he saw the platform crowded with residents, eyes narrowed against the glare towards the distant promise of the arriving train. Hemlock, the town's self-appointed welcoming committee, stood rigidly, his chest puffed out like an overfed rooster. Mrs. Abernathy, the baker, held a cluster of drooping sunflowers, their bright faces defeated by the heat. Even Clem, the deputy usually found idling in the saloon's cool shadow, leaned against a post, his hand hovering near his sidearm, a solitary drop of perspiration tracing a path down his sun-baked face. Separated from the group, Jedediah watched the tracks, his shoulders slumped with worry. He wore his most presentable denim shirt, faded and mended though it was, and his scuffed boots gleamed with a desperate shine. He repeatedly smoothed back his thinning hair, plastered down with well water. He looked deeply uneasy, like a cornered wolf. Romance was the furthest thing from Jedediah's mind. The drought had crippled the ranch, leaving cattle skeletal and weak. The bank loomed like a vulture, threatening to seize everything. He needed a lifeline, and he hoped against hope that Clementine might be it. He hadn't burdened Billy with these worries. The boy carried enough burdens already. A harsh sound, like stones grinding together, escaped his throat. Billy, think she'll take to this place? The lone rider vanished from Billy's thoughts as he snapped the book shut. Sure, Pa. Harmony Gulch is the greatest place on earth. He tried to infuse his voice with enthusiasm, but the words rang hollow, even to himself. He knew their town was fading, barely clinging to existence. Jedediah just grunted, unconvinced. He mopped his brow with a crumpled handkerchief. A distant train whistle echoed across the desolate landscape. A lament carried on the wind. She's coming, someone announced. Silence descended upon the crowd. Jedediah's heart slammed in his chest. A primal urge to flee, to vanish into the vast emptiness surrounding them, washed over him. But he remained rooted to the spot, his boots digging into the dusty ground. He had given his word, and a Harding kept his promises, even if they broke him. Excitement bubbled within Billy. He moved closer to his pa, his gaze riveted on the approaching train, a mechanical leviathan belching smoke and steam. He imagined Clementine descending, a beacon of beauty and compassion ready to fill the void in his young life. With a screech of protesting brakes, the train shuddered to a halt. A plume of dust enveloped the platform, briefly obscuring everything. A stout conductor with a waxed mustache hopped down, casting a bored glance over the assembled townspeople. Harmony Gulch, he called out. That's us. Hemlock bellowed, his chest swelling even further. The conductor nodded and disappeared back into the carriage. Then a figure appeared in the doorway, backlit by the sun. It was a woman, yet nothing like the images conjured by Billy's imagination. She wore trousers tucked into sturdy boots and a denim shirt that bore a striking resemblance to his pa's. A wide brimmed hat concealed her face, but the hint of a smile played on her lips. Jedediah swallowed hard. This was it. Clementine had arrived. He stepped forward, extending his hand. As the woman descended, her eyes surveyed the group, pausing momentarily on Jedediah. She drew a deep breath and removed her hat, revealing a torrent of vibrant red hair. Howdy, folks, she announced, her voice ringing out. I'm Clementine. And last I checked, I'm looking for a cattle baron. She winked, and for the first time in years, a spark of hope ignited within Jedediah Harding. She wasn't what he expected, but maybe, just maybe, she was precisely what he needed. A splash of yellow. The noon train wheezed into Dust Gulch like a dying beast, its whistle a mournful groan swallowed by the vast emptiness. Jedediah, leaning against the weathered post of the general store, watched as the engine shuddered to a halt, spitting steam and cinders onto the parched earth. Dust devils danced in the sudden silence that followed, mocking the stillness of the waiting townsfolk. Then the train door creaked open and a splash of yellow erupted into the drab landscape. A woman descended, a whirlwind of sunshine in a dress the color of lemons. Clementine Bloom. The fabric swirled around her ankles as she hopped down, her laughter, bright and clear, momentarily silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Jedediah felt a flicker of something akin to surprise, a feeling he hadn't entertained in years. He hadn't expected this. The catalog picture hadn't done her justice. Or perhaps it was just that nothing could truly capture the sheer force of her optimism. She surveyed the town with wide, curious eyes, her gaze lingering on the dilapidated buildings, the dusty streets, and the faces etched with hardship. There was no disappointment in her expression, only an unwavering sense of interest. Jedediah pushed himself off the post and stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Miss Bloom," he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Clementine turned, her smile widening. "Mr. Harding, I presume?" She offered her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Her eyes, the color of warm honey, held his gaze. He shook her hand, the callous skin of his palm a stark contrast to her soft touch. "Welcome to Dust Gulch." He gestured around with a sweep of his arm, encompassing the desolation. "Thank you," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's certainly something." She paused, searching for the right word. "Rustic?" Jedediah grunted, unconvinced. A small boy, Billy, peeked out from behind Jedediah's legs, his eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Clementine noticed him instantly. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice softening. She reached into her small satchel and pulled out a brightly wrapped peppermint candy. "Would you like one?" Billy shrank back, burying his face in Jedediah's trousers. Jedediah placed a hand on the boy's head. "He's shy." Clementine knelt down, offering the candy again. "It's okay," she said gently. "My name's Clementine. What's yours?" Billy peeked out again, his gaze fixed on the candy. He mumbled something unintelligible. "Billy," Jedediah supplied. "It's nice to meet you, Billy," Clementine said, her smile genuine. "This is a peppermint. Tastes like Christmas." Billy hesitated for another moment. Then, emboldened by the promise of Christmas in a candy, he reached out a hesitant hand and took it. He unwrapped it slowly, his eyes never leaving Clementine's face. Then, he popped it into his mouth and his eyes widened. "See," Clementine said, standing up. "Christmas in a candy." Jedediah watched the exchange, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He hadn't seen Billy smile like that in, well, he couldn't remember the last time. "The buggy's over there," he said, gesturing toward a dilapidated wagon hitched to a sway-backed mare. "Let's get you settled." Clementine picked up her valise, its leather worn but polished. "Lead the way, Mr. Harding. I'm eager to see my new home." As they walked toward the buggy, Clementine continued to observe the town, her head tilted slightly, her eyes taking in every detail. Jedediah couldn't help but wonder what she was really thinking. Was she already regretting her decision? Was the yellow dress a shield, hiding a wave of disappointment? He glanced at Billy, who was now skipping along beside Clementine, the peppermint candy already half gone. Perhaps, Jedediah thought, a splash of yellow was exactly what Dust Gulch needed. Perhaps it was what he needed. The last dollar. Jedediah unseated himself with a groan, the sinking sun stretching gaunt shadows from the crumbling windmill. He offered a handful of wildflowers, their hues leached by the arid air, their fragile heads bowed low. "Found these by the creek. It ain't much, I reckon." His voice, sandpaper rough, rasped the words. Clementine accepted the offering, her smile wavering as her gaze traveled from the weary blossoms to the deep furrows lining Jedediah's face. "They're lovely, Jed." "Thank you." She inhaled their faint, rooty scent. He shuffled, eyes glued to a parched patch of ground. The silence grew, a heavy blanket, disturbed only by the windmill's mournful sigh in the slight breeze. "Clementine," he started, the name feeling clumsy in his mouth. He cleared his throat, the sound raw. I need to lay it all out for you." He swallowed, the obstruction in his throat feeling like granite. He could face down a raging storm, stare into the abyss, yet confessing his shortcomings to this woman felt like the most daunting task ever. With a weary gesture, he indicated the dilapidated ranch house, its paint flaking like old parchment. This ain't much of an estate. And I ain't the finest specimen to offer it with." Clementine's brow creased in concern. "Jed, what are you getting at?" He finally locked eyes with her, a naked vulnerability shimmering in their depths, an emotion he usually kept padlocked away. I'm saying I'm flat broke. This ranch, it's hemorrhaging money. Debts are stacked to the rafters." His callous fingers wrestled in his pocket, finally extracting a solitary, crumpled dollar. He presented it, his hand quivering almost imperceptibly. This is what's left. My last dollar." Should have come clean earlier, but I feared you bolt. Shame seared him, a bitter tide rising in his chest. He averted his gaze, unable to meet her judgment. You're free to take it. Catch the next train out. I'd understand. The quiet descended again, but this time weighted with held expectations, a breath suspended. Jedediah steeled himself for tears, recriminations, disappointment. But the sound that broke the quiet was far from any of those. Clementine erupted in laughter. The peal echoed across the desolate land, bright and unexpected as a sunburst after a long drought. Jedediah blinked, dumbfounded. Was she unraveling? Had he finally pushed her over the edge? Your last dollar? She gasped, dabbing at her streaming eyes. Her mirth ebbed to joyful murmurs. Jed, you truly are something else. He frowned, his confusion deepening. I don't follow. Clementine moved closer, her smile radiant. She reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly firm and warm. I didn't ride out here for a fortune, Jed. Didn't dream of a mansion or a life of ease. I came seeking an adventure. She squeezed his hand, her eyes blazing with a fervor that quickened his pulse. I craved a taste of the West. I wanted to immerse myself in something genuine, something raw. I yearned to find a man who needed me. A faint blush painted her cheeks. And you, Jedediah Harding, you patently need someone. She lofted the dollar bill, watching it twirl to the dusty ground. Keep your dollar. We'll carve out something together. Something authentic. Something uniquely ours. Jedediah stared, his thoughts in a whirl. He had braced for rejection, pity, even revulsion. Anything but this affirmation. A tentative ember of hope sparked within him, banishing the deep shadows that had clung so long. He regarded Clementine anew, seeing not a fragile city flower, but a woman of surprising resilience and unwavering conviction. A woman who, perhaps, could glimpse in him something he had long ceased to see himself. He could not foretell what awaited them, but for the first time in years, Jedediah Harding felt a flicker of optimism. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant strokes of crimson and gold as if celebrating a new dawn. Whispers and doubts. The general store resonated with a muted drone, a collective hush descending whenever Clementine crossed the threshold. Calico prints and gingham swatches were momentarily ignored, replaced by furtive glances and murmured judgments that slithered through aisles stocked with licorice sticks and kerosene. Mail-order bride, one voice rasped, the words like splinters under the tongue. Dollar store variety. Doubt she's worth her keep, another sharper tone added. Clementine feigned deafness, a strained smile plastered on her face as she scrutinized a bruised tin of peaches. Dear Jedediah had allotted her a meager sum, but she was determined to make it last. She could feel their eyes boring into her back, the palpable disapproval and arid wind against her skin. Dusk Gulch had offered a frosty welcome, these weathered souls, hardened by adversity and suspicious of novelty. She'd caught glimpses of them, the women gathered by the well, shawls drawn tight, their voices a low susurrus that rode the breeze. City fancy, she imagined them sneering. What does she know of ranch life? Of surviving out here? She quashed the tendrils of self-doubt. Such anxieties were a luxury beyond her reach. At the counter, she addressed Mr. Abernathy, his face a tapestry of wrinkles etched by years of sun and wind. Mr. Abernathy, she began, her voice ringing with forced cheer, I was curious if you might consider a barter. He cocked a skeptical brow, his gaze lingering on her uncalloused hands. Barter, you say? What could a slip of a thing like you possibly offer? Clementine placed a neatly bundled package on the worn wood. Fresh eggs. Jedediah's hens are laying prodigiously. And, she added, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur, I couldn't help noticing your back room could use some organization. I have a knack for such things. Abernathy's eyes narrowed. The back room was a legendary disaster. A monument to misplaced goods and invoices lost in the shuffle. He'd been dreading tackling it for months. Eggs and tidying up, eh? He stroked his grizzled chin, contemplating. What d'ya have in mind for compensation? Some flour, sugar, and a bit of that blue gingham, she replied, gesturing towards a bolt tucked into a shadowed corner. Enough for an apron. He grunted, the sound indecipherable. Yet, after a moment's consideration, he nodded slowly. All right, Miss Bloom, you have yourself a bargain. Back at the homestead, the sun blazed with oppressive intensity. Jedediah was absent, likely tending the herd. Clementine secured her hair and assessed the decrepit chicken coop fence. It listed precariously, the wood riddled with decay. She located a hammer and nails in the barn along with a pile of reclaimed timber. Not a carpenter, but resourceful, she'd learned to improvise from childhood, mending tiers, patching holes. With unwavering determination, she began replacing the rotten sections, hammering with unexpected force. Sweat streamed down her spine, gluing her blouse to her skin, but she pressed on. Later, she turned her attention to the water trough, scouring it clean of algae and scum. She replenished it with cool water, watching the chickens flock to drink, their contented clucking a welcome melody. She scattered a handful of feed, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. As twilight descended, splashing the horizon with fiery hues, Jedediah returned. He dismounted, his face lined with weariness. He paused, surveying the mended fence, the pristine water trough, the thriving chickens. He remained silent, but Clementine detected a fleeting expression in his gaze, surprise, perhaps, or even approval? He offered only a curt nod, a gesture pregnant with meaning. "Supper will be ready shortly," Clementine offered, her voice gentle. Inside the cabin, she occupied herself preparing a simple supper of beans and biscuits. The whispers still echoed, the doubts lingered, the weight of their judgment pressed on her. Yet as she stirred the simmering pot, she knew she was giving her all. And that, she conceded, was all she could offer. One mended fence, one clean trough, one gracious gesture at a time. She would earn their respect. She would prove them wrong. Blossoming hope. Dust devils still pirouette on the horizon, yet inside the ranch house, a different kind of stir was underway. It began subtly, with Clementine's gentle hum as she repaired a rip in Billy's worn overalls, her needle a silver flash in the sunlit room. Usually sprawling on the floor, he was now perched anxiously on the edge of his seat, eyes wide with rapt attention. "You make that look simple," he muttered, his grimy finger tracing the floral design on her skirt. Clementine's chuckle, a melodic chime, banished the room's gloom. "Practice makes anything seem simple, Billy. Like mounting a horse, or..." A playful light danced in her gaze. "Deciphering words." Billy flinched as if struck. "Can't read. Never could grasp it." "Nonsense," Clementine countered, setting aside the mended garment. From her carpetbag, she produced a tattered primer, its cover emblazoned with a crimson apple. "Anyone can learn. Patience and a dash of fun are all it takes." His first attempts were awkward fumbles. Billy wrestled with the letters, brow creased in fierce concentration, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth. Clementine offered no reprimands, never hurried him. Instead, she highlighted the letter forms, likening them to familiar shapes, the arc of a horseshoe, the rigid line of a fence. She spun tales around the words, narratives of distant lands and valiant knights, igniting a spark of curiosity in his often blank expression. Outside, Jedediah, from the porch, stood mesmerized by the scene unfolding within. He had intended to repair the shaky railing, but found himself immobile, struggling to name the emotions bubbling within. It wasn't quite jealousy, more akin to perplexity. He had grown accustomed to the ranch's quiet solitude, the predictable cadence of his days. Now, Clementine's lively spirit vibrated in the air, her laughter echoing across the yard, and Billy. Billy was actually smiling, a rare and precious sight. Later that week, Clementine decided to revive the garden. A parched, cracked plot overrun with tenacious weeds, it stood as a monument to years of apathy. To her surprise, Billy volunteered his assistance. Though lacking in finesse, often mistaking weed for flower, he worked with a quiet resolve, his small hands mirroring Clementine's actions. "Why bother?" he questioned one afternoon, wiping his brow with a dirt-streaked hand. "This place ain't worth a thing." Clementine paused, her fingers gently caressing the delicate petals of a wildflower bravely pushing through the weeds. "Everything possesses value, Billy. Even a piece of barren earth. It merely requires tenderness, a little devotion." Her gaze met his, a warmth radiating that brought color to his cheeks. "Just as you do." That night, Jedediah discovered Billy engrossed in the primer, brow furrowed in intense study. He quietly mouthed the sounds, tracing the characters with his fingertip. Unnoticed, Jedediah leaned against the doorframe. He watched the boy's lips form the word apple. He witnessed a glimmer of understanding light his eyes. Something within Jedediah shifted, a long-dormant seed beginning to germinate. It was more than just hope, although that factored in. It was something profound, elemental. It was the dawning realization that, perhaps even in this forsaken corner of the world, beauty could still flourish. Blackwood's offer. Even before the dust settled from the noon train's departure, a funereal carriage, drawn by a jet-black team, crunched up the gravel drive. Jedediah, still reeling from the unsettling lightness in his pocket and the lingering warmth of Clementine's handshake, observed its approach from the porch. He didn't need to guess the visitor's identity. Silas Blackwood. Blackwood dispensed with any pretense of courtesy. He unfolded from the vehicle a portly figure encased in a city suit that clashed sharply with the ranch's rustic decay. His gaze, laced with contempt, swept over the property. "Harding. Heard about your misfortunes." Jedediah's jaw tightened. My affairs are my own, Blackwood. In Dusk Gulch, everyone's problems become communal property, eventually. Especially where land is involved. Blackwood's eyes, gleaming with avarice, lingered on the dilapidated barn, the crumbling fence, the pervasive air of ruin that clung to the ranch like a persistent odor. Rumor has it you're in a tight spot. Taxes overdue, livestock vanished. A man must be practical. He made a sweeping gesture with a gloved hand. And I pride myself on practicality, Harding. So, I'm prepared to offer you a reasonable price for this holding. A familiar slow burn ignited in Jedediah's chest. He knew Blackwood's idea of reasonable. It would be a paltry sum, barely enough to settle the debts, leaving him destitute. This ranch has been in my family for generations, Blackwood. It's not for sale. Blackwood emitted a dry, mirthless chuckle. Sentimentality is an indulgence a man can ill afford when staring down the abyss of financial ruin. Consider it, Harding. You could salvage something, make a clean start. Before the carrion birds start circling. He paused, letting the threat resonate. Besides, what can a man of your years possibly do with all this acreage? Clementine stepped forward, her chin held high. It's worth more than you think. Her voice, though gentle, possessed a core of resolve. Blackwood's attention swiveled to her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He'd seemingly overlooked her presence, too consumed by the prospect of profit. And to whom do I owe this pleasure, darlin'? Clementine Bloom, she replied, extending her hand. Blackwood hesitated momentarily, then clasped it, his grip unexpectedly light. Intriguing. He scrutinized her face, noting her intelligent gaze and the firmness of her jaw. A touch of urban sophistication in this backwater. What draws you to Harding's crumbling domain? I'm here to assist, she stated simply. And I possess enough knowledge of ranching to recognize the potential of this land. Far more than you're willing to concede, Mr. Blackwood. She indicated the fields. The soil is fertile. The creek provides a reliable water source. With proper care and a modest investment, this could become a flourishing enterprise. Blackwood's gaze darted back to Jedediah, a glint of sardonic amusement in his eyes. You've acquired yourself a consultant, Harding? A schoolteacher who can tell the difference between wheatgrass and weeds. He refocused on Clementine. You've been deceived, Miss Bloom. This place is a lost cause. Harding is an obstinate old fool clinging to a bygone era. He's a man of integrity, Clementine retorted, her voice gaining an edge. And this is his legacy. It's not yours to usurp. Blackwood's lips curled into a predatory smile. Feisty. I admire that. And you're undeniably astute. A rare quality in this locale. Tell you what, Miss Bloom. I'm always searching for sharp minds. Perhaps you and I could discuss alternative arrangements. I could certainly benefit from your, insights. He lingered on the word, his gaze lingering on her a beat too long. A wave of protective fury washed over Jedediah. Get off my land, Blackwood. His voice was a low rumble of thunder. Blackwood raised his hands in a gesture of mock appeasement. All right. No need to get ruffled, Harding. Just extending an offer. Consider it. Both of you. My proposition stands. For the present. He offered a perfunctory nod to Clementine, a suggestive smirk playing on his lips, then retreated into his carriage. The ebony horses snorted, impatient, and the conveyance lumbered back down the drive, leaving a swirling vortex of dust in its wake. Jedediah tracked the carriage's departure until it vanished over the horizon. He remained silent, his back to Clementine. The only sound was the mournful sigh of the wind through the barn's dilapidated timbers, carrying the gritty scent of the arid land and the palpable menace of Silas Blackwood. The healing touch. A pitiful bawling tore through the pre-dawn quiet. Clementine, already awake, slipped out of the bunkhouse, a shawl pulled tight against the chill. The sound led her to the birthing pen, where Maggie, a young heifer, lay panting, her newborn calf listless at her side. Jedediah knelt beside them, his face etched with worry. Scours, he muttered, not looking up. Happens sometimes. Usually means they don't make it. Clementine knelt too, her fingers gentle as she examined the calf. Its eyes were dull, its coat matted with diarrhea. It's dehydrated, she said, her voice calm. But not too far gone. We can help him. Jedediah straightened, his expression skeptical. Help him how? That won't come all the way out here for a sick calf. And I ain't got the money for it anyway. I have some things, Clementine said, already heading towards the root cellar. Things my grandmother taught me. She returned with a basket filled with dried herbs and roots. While Jedediah watched with thinly veiled disbelief, Clementine brewed a tea from chamomile, ginger, and something she called devil's claw, the pungent aroma filling the air. She mixed it with electrolytes and, using a makeshift syringe fashioned from a hollowed-out bird bone and a piece of leather, carefully administered it to the calf. He needs fluids, she explained to Jedediah, who was kneeling beside her. She encouraged him to help her keep the calf still and their hands brushed. Jedediah's callous skin was rough against hers, but his grip was gentle. For 2 days, Clementine nursed the calf, coaxing it to drink, keeping it warm, and cleaning its pen. Jedediah, initially hesitant, found himself drawn into the effort. He brought fresh hay, helped with the cleaning, and even, to Clementine's surprise, offered suggestions based on his own years of experience. On the 3rd day, the calf stood. Wobbly at first, but then stronger, suckling greedily from its mother. A wave of relief washed over Clementine, leaving her weak-kneed. Silas Blackwood arrived that afternoon, unannounced as usual. He found Jedediah and Clementine watching the calf, a shared smile playing on their lips. Silas's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. "Heard you had some trouble," Silas said, his gaze fixed on Jedediah. "Another setback. Tough times out here, Jedediah. Maybe it's time you reconsidered my offer." Jedediah stood tall, his back ramrod straight. "The calf's fine, Silas. Thanks to Clementine." Silas turned to Clementine, his expression a mixture of curiosity and something that bordered on respect. "You have a way with animals, Miss Bloom. They respond to kindness," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. Silas chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Kindness doesn't pay the bills." He turned back to Jedediah. "Think about it, Jedediah. My offer still stands. A fair price. More than fair, considering your situation." Jedediah looked from Silas to Clementine, then back to the calf, nuzzling against its mother. A spark of something, a flicker of defiance, ignited in his eyes. "My situation ain't as dire as you think, Silas. And I'm not selling. Not now. Not ever." Silas's face hardened. He opened his mouth to speak, but then seemed to think better of it. "Suit yourself," he said, his voice tight. He tipped his hat to Clementine, a gesture that felt more like a threat than a courtesy, and then strode back to his buggy, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As the dust settled, Jedediah turned to Clementine, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said, the words gruff but sincere. For everything." Clementine smiled. "You're welcome, Jedediah." That night, as Clementine lay in her bunk, she heard Jedediah moving around outside. She peeked through the window to see him standing by the birthing pen, watching the calf and its mother. He looked different, stronger, more determined. The weight on his shoulders seemed a little lighter. The healing touch wasn't just for the calf, it seemed. Flood. Heavy raindrops hammered the window, jolting Clementine awake. The metallic tang of ozone filled the air. A guttural rumble resonated through the floor, not the peal of thunder, but something deeper, more ominous. She flew to the window. An indigo sky, rent by jagged lightning, revealed the river transformed into a monstrous, roiling thing. It surged far beyond its usual banks, a muddy fiend tearing at the earth. Panic constricted her throat. "Jed," she shouted, snatching up her boots. He was already descending the stairs, yanking on his oilskins. "Damn the river," he growled, lines of worry creasing his face. "She's breaking her banks." The ranch hands, stirred by Jed's bellow, stumbled from the bunkhouse, their expressions mirroring his unease. Even lethargic Billy was wrestling with his boots, a rare urgency in his movements. "Horses first," Jed commanded, his voice struggling against the storm's rising shriek. High ground past the south meadow. Then the cattle. The downpour intensified, a blinding curtain that lashed at Clementine as she and Billy struggled toward the stables. The gale clawed at their clothing, a relentless force. Fear coiled in Clementine's gut, but she pushed it down. Speed was paramount. Inside, the horses neighed in blind terror, their eyes wide with panic. Clementine soothed her mare, Bess, with soft words and gentle strokes, while Billy wrestled with the corral gate. The river swelled visibly, now a churning, ochre beast. They managed to drive the horses toward the designated high ground, the animals skittish and unruly in the tempest's fury. Upon reaching the relative safety of the south meadow, they turned back for the cattle. The cattle presented a greater challenge. The herd milled, disoriented and agitated, stubbornly resisting movement toward the gate. Jed, his features a study in frustration, plunged into their midst, his whip cracking like gunfire as he roared instructions. Clementine and Billy flanked the herd, coaxing them forward. The water was already licking greedily at the lower pasture. As they finally succeeded in moving the cattle, a massive wave, far exceeding the others, crested the bank. It smashed into Billy, sweeping his legs out from under him. "Billy!" Clementine screamed, helpless as he vanished beneath the tumultuous surface. Without a second thought, she dove into the maelstrom. The current slammed into her, stealing the air from her lungs and threatening to drag her under. She battled the relentless force, her limbs flailing, her feet sliding on the slick riverbed. She caught sight of Billy, his head bobbing erratically, his eyes wide with stark terror. He was being pulled inexorably toward the river's unforgiving channel. She kicked with desperate strength, fighting the relentless pull until she reached him. Seizing his arm, she hauled him toward the relative shelter of a massive cottonwood, its roots stubbornly clinging to the bank. She wrapped his arm around a thick branch, securing him as best she could. "Hold on, Billy," she yelled, her voice ragged against the storm's fury. "Hold on tight." The icy water churned around them, a relentless assault. They clung to the tree, the river's power threatening to rip them from their precarious hold. Clementine felt Billy shudder beside her, his grip faltering. Finally Jed, having secured the cattle on higher ground, spotted them. He plunged into the surging water, battling his way toward them, his face a rigid mask of resolve. He reached them, and together, he and Clementine wrestled Billy to safety, dragging him back to solid ground, beyond the river's reach. Wrapped in a blanket near the fire in the main house, Billy choked up water, his complexion ashen. He looked at Clementine, his gaze brimming with gratitude. "You saved me," he croaked, his voice barely audible. Clementine squeezed his hand, her own trembling. "We saved each other," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Jed stood by the window watching the receding floodwaters. He remained silent, but Clementine glimpsed something flicker in his eyes, a warmth that transcended mere thankfulness. He had witnessed her bravery, her quick thinking. He had seen her willingness to risk everything for another. And in that instant, Clementine understood she had finally earned his respect. Harmony restored. Before the sun even gilded the peaks, the rumble of wagons broke the morning stillness at Harding Ranch. Not the ominous approach of Silas Blackwood's men this time, but a joyous clamor emanating from Harmony Gulch. Out poured women, arms laden with covered dishes, their laughter ringing through the cool air. Men followed, wielding tools instead of weapons, their faces set with grim purpose. Jedediah, rooted to the porch, gaped. He'd steeled himself for more desolation, solitude's heavy cloak. "Heard about the washout, Jed?" Martha Peterson's voice boomed, cutting through the cheerful din. "Ain't right to leave a neighbor drownin'." Clementine, already mired in muck, straightened, wiping her forehead. "They're here for you, Jed," she murmured, her eyes alight with compassion. "Let them." He relented. He watched, humbled to the core, as his community transformed the ruined landscape. The womenfolk, Clementine among them, orchestrated the relief effort with impressive efficiency, establishing a makeshift cookhouse where the air soon bloomed with the scent of brewing coffee and baking bread. The men, with a reluctant Jedediah joining their ranks, attacked the shattered barn, the broken fences, the fields littered with debris. By noon, the ranch vibrated with renewed life. Children chased chickens underfoot, dogs yipped in exuberant play, and the steady cadence of hammers provided a resilient heartbeat to the day. Clementine, mud-streaked and with tendrils escaping her braid, moved with effortless grace, guiding the work, suggesting solutions, seemingly omnipresent. He found himself inexplicably drawn to her quiet fortitude, her resilient spirit. As twilight painted the sky in hues of fire, casting elongated shadows from the resurrected barn, Jedediah addressed the assembled crowd. His voice, thick with emotion, was barely audible, yet each syllable resonated with sincerity. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his gaze drifting over each familiar face. "Thank you. More than words can hold." A roar of approval erupted, reverberating through the revitalized ranch. The following day, Harmony Gulch transformed once more, this time for celebration. Bunting in vibrant crimsons and golds festooned every building. The fragrant aroma of roasting corn and spiced cider hung in the air, a sweet-smelling benediction. It was the annual harvest festival, yet this year possessed a deeper significance. It was a testament to the community's indomitable spirit, a beacon of hope rekindled. Clementine, luminous in a dress the color of autumn leaves, stood beside Jedediah as the revelry commenced. He loomed above her, a tower of strength and reassurance. He even managed a flicker of a smile, barely perceptible. "Never figured I'd witness it," wheezed old man Hemlock, leaning heavily on his gnarled cane. Jed Harding smilin' at a festival. "You're a regular miracle worker, Clementine." Clementine laughed, a bright, melodic sound that resonated within Jedediah's soul. He found himself yearning for it to fill the air again. The festival unfurled in a whirl of mirth, melody, and playful contests. Children bobbed for apples with gleeful shrieks, couples swayed beneath the twinkling lanterns, and the air thrummed with collective joy. Even Jedediah succumbed to the infectious spirit, participating in a horseshoe competition and awkwardly attempting a two-step with Clementine. Later, as the first stars began to prick the velvet sky, Jedediah and Clementine found themselves alone on the porch, the sounds of the celebration receding into a gentle background murmur. "Thank you, Clementine," Jedediah said, his voice a soft rumble, "for everything you've done." "No thanks needed, Jed," she replied gently. "This is where I belong. With you." He reached for her hand, his rough fingers entwining with hers. He remained silent, yet in that simple clasp he conveyed depths he couldn't articulate, gratitude, respect, and an emotion that felt suspiciously like burgeoning love. Abruptly, a shadowy figure materialized from the darkness. Silas Blackwood. He stood there, his lips curled in a venomous smirk. "Enjoying the festivities, Harding?" he snarled. "It's fleeting. This land will be mine, one way or another." Jedediah stepped protectively in front of Clementine, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Get off my land, Blackwood," he growled, his voice a dangerous rasp. "You're not wanted here." "We'll see about that," Silas hissed, before dissolving back into the shadows. Jedediah turned back to Clementine, his harsh expression softening. "Don't worry," he vowed, his voice resolute. "I won't let him touch you." She met his gaze, her own unwavering. "I know you won't, Jed." Hand in hand, they remained silhouetted against the star-studded canvas of the night. The specter of Silas Blackwood lingered, a looming threat, but for that moment, in the heart of Harmony Gulch, equilibrium had been restored, and together they would confront whatever lay ahead.